Hey there guys, Postowo here. Today what I got for you is a video on the history of H.S. Cover Co. This is actually a remake of a older series that's on the channel. Well, that was on the channel, I've privated it now. But I've got a whole lot more information on this topic, and the last series was 5 parts, and I'm going to condense this one down to 3. So, let's jump right into it. Harvey Samuel Cover was born on March the 1st, 1867 in Jenners, Pennsylvania, to his parents Emmanuel and Anne Cover. Not much is known about Cover's father, but his mother would die when Cover was only 11. 2 years later, he would move to Goshen, Indiana to seek work. Due to his mother's death, he had to rely entirely on himself financially, leading him to work instead of attending school. At some point, he would get a job at a flour mill, which is quite dusty work, and it was at this flour mill that he first became interested in respiratory protection. This self-reliance lasted until he was 17, when he was able to attend a school at Goshen, and after a couple years of that, he managed to become a teacher there. Eventually, though, he would leave Goshen for Chicago, where he would attend the Armor Institute and graduate with a degree in engineering, presumably to help him design respirators. Cover had been interested in science and stuff like that since he was just a little kid. He was always one to take on and investigate different scientific topics, which unfortunately included, for much of his life, eugenics. Specifically, he seemed to be kind of a follower of the famous eugenicist and scientific racist Francis Galton, who saw eugenics as a form of religion. Galton believed that a perfect society could be achieved through eugenics and that humanity could reach some new golden age. So yeah, he was pretty gross. Cover was, unfortunately, a big fan of his ideas, even being the first to create a chart version of the Galton's Law, which got him some scientific acclaim when eugenics was still something that scientists acclaimed. So yeah, that really blows. Anyhow, back to the actual history. In 1890, Cover would move to South Bend, Indiana. It's unclear if he met her before moving there or after, but he would, around this time, meet a woman named Katie Burkheiser, who he would marry in 1895. The wedding was held on the 26th of June and was a surprise to most of the attendees. What the pair did is they just sent a letter to all their friends and family saying, oh, we're going to have a get-together, it's going to be fun, and then about halfway through the event, they snuck out, and the best man and the bridesmaids and all them came back in their wedding garb, and that's when people realized what was really up. Not really all that important of a detail, but, you know, I figured I'd still include it to offset the grimness of the eugenics bit. However, what is important is just a year prior, in 1894, Harvey Samuel Cover would found the Dust Protector Company, selling just his first respirator, the Dust Protector. He would patent that respirator just a couple years later in 1897. The Dust Protector Co. would only keep its name for a couple years, as in 1896, the company would change its name to H.S. Cover Co. Anyways, I will put a couple images on screen of what the Dust Protector looks like. Going back to his personal life for a moment, Cover would have 2 children with his wife, now Katie Cover. One of them was Harold Stanley Cover, who was born in 1907, but, more importantly, was Estelle Catherine Cover, who was born in 1900. We're going to talk about her a lot in the next episode. And it was a year after the birth of Estelle, in 1901, that Harvey Samuel Cover would release Cover's automatic respirator, his most popular mask ever. It was essentially a rubber cup with a sponge and an exhale valve and also an adjustable head strap, and was clearly based on the 1879 H.R. Hurd respirator, which I will include a picture of the patent in the video right now. While the H.R. Hurd respirator seems to have been a complete flop commercially, Cover's automatic respirator was a massive success. For decades, it would spawn numerous clones across the United States and Europe. Notably, some of these clones would be used during the First World War by both the French and the Germans. Domestically, companies such as Sesco, Testrite, or even Pulmosan would also create their own clones. But we are kind of getting ahead of ourselves. Going back to the 1900s, Cover would release yet another respirator, Cover's aluminum respirator. Here's a quick picture of that. At the time, which was, about the turn of the century, give or take a couple decades, so by this I mean like late 1800s to like early 1900s, there was a trend of making respirators out of aluminum or other lightweight metals. They were durable, but, well, they would often not seal very reliably, and so they would need the assistance of an add-on rubber peripheral seal. Cover's aluminum respirator seems to have been a commercial failure, despite its attachment to the Cover name. Why I think that is because Cover's automatic respirator was already excellent for the time, and so there's not really a reason to buy Cover's aluminum respirator when you could get something better from the same people. Moving on from that, in 1907, Cover would patent a series of pneumatic cushion goggles meant for swimming or industrial protection. And these goggles were good enough to be cloned overseas by the Germans, so from 1908 to 1912, Cover would sue a series of 5 German firms that did so. Eventually, he would win a 10-cent royalty on every pair of the goggles shipped to the United States. Speaking of the Germans, 2 years after this, World War I would start. The Great War, of course, saw the first mass use of chemical warfare in history. And it was because of that there was major strides in respiratory protective technology in the span of just a couple of years. And really, by the end of 1915, Cover's automatic respirator was kind of obsolescent, and by 1918 or 1919, it was just full-on obsolete. Other industrial safety companies would notice this almost immediately, and by 1919 start producing respirators that just blew anything from H.S. Cover Co. right out of the water. However, it would take H.S. Cover until the early 30s to notice and actually do something about that. This would really cause the company to stagnate in sales and growth until really the 1980s, when it was finally pulled out of it. But we will talk about that more in the next 2 episodes. Cover did not stop designing respirators during the 20s, though. In fact, he just continued doing what he was doing. The first of the things that he would release in the 1920s are these, the Nod and Shake goggles. He put them on the market in 1922 and advertised them as both industrial safety goggles as well as recreational swimming goggles. The Nod and Shake goggles got their name from their novel defogging system. How it worked was, before donning them, you would put some water in the lens frames and pour out the excess, so it would look like that. And once you're wearing them, once the goggles fog up, you can slosh the water over the lenses to clear the fogging by nodding and shaking your head. They seem to have been somewhat popular. They would sell these for decades. I mean, there's evidence to suggest that they were selling these into the 2000s, but that's not confirmed. However, we do know that they were selling them in the 1990s. Unfortunately, I don't have an example of these 1990s Nod and Shakes, but I do have pictures of them. But this video is supposed to be about the 1880s through 1920s, so we'll get back to that era. In the early 1920s, half-face gas masks, which by that I mean essentially just half-face respirators that could combat gas, such as Cover's automatic respirator, were just rapidly losing popularity as they just weren't as good as a normal full-face gas mask. And so a cheap way to design a pseudo full-face gas mask was the combination respirator. Essentially what these were just respirators that had goggles just permanently affixed to them. And among these, there were a whole bunch made in the 1920s, but among these was Cover's Nod and Shake gas mask, which is essentially a upgraded Cover's automatic respirator with a pair of Nod and Shake goggles strapped to it. These masks were mostly aimed towards firefighters, as this was starting to become a booming market. Respirators for firefighters had existed for decades at this point, maybe even centuries. But with the gas mask really entering public consciousness, firefighters started to look at them and go, I could really use one of those. The Nod and Shake gas mask would actually go through a series of name changes throughout the couple of decades that they were being sold. The first of these would be the Nod and Shake smoke mask. It's not exactly known why they changed it to that. It might be because they might not have been able to get away with calling it a gas mask since, well, gas masks are good now. There's no need for a sponge respirator to call itself a gas mask. They could get sued for false advertising. That might be why they changed the name, but they also might have changed it to make it more appealing to firefighters. Now, you could make the case that calling it a smoke mask instead of a gas mask would make it look better to firefighters because they might think, well, I'm not facing gas, I'm facing smoke, so this wouldn't be for me. But poison smoke is oftentimes used to refer to like a lot of poison gases that aren't like actually gases. This could be stuff like riot agents or essentially smokes that are poisonous, really. In the 1930s or maybe 1940s, to match the thing up with the Dupor product line that we will talk about in the next episode, H.S. Cover Co. started referring to this as the Dupor combination smoke mask. But it seems that name was only very briefly used and then discarded. And of course, individual retailers would call it whatever they wanted. Like I have a catalog that lists it as the number 889 safety smoke and gas mask. And his seemingly final creation of the 1920s would be a clone of the Katz respirator. That's K-A-T-Z. He would do this in 1928. Here's what the patent looks like for that. So as you can see, it's kind of a bizarre and novel type of respirator. It seems like it was based on a Cover's automatic respirator where they took essentially the place where they would have the exhale valve, added it to the other side, and then attached a hose that would lead to this helmet that you wear on the top of your head with a filter in it. There was also these elastic straps that also connect to the helmet to keep it nice and tight. The exhale valve would be moved to the front. And Cover, in his unwillingness to ever use a modern filtering element, decided not to use charcoal for a gas mask or felt, but instead he decided to use shredded jute. Yeah, so it was essentially just shredded rope that you could put neutralizing liquid chemicals into. And the respirator's patent actually says that not only does it work great as a respirator, but you can also just use it as a hat because it protects you from the sun's rays and bonks on the head. Obviously and unfortunately, it was a complete commercial failure with no examples surviving today. I really wish I could get my hands on one of these because they are cool. But unfortunately, that's probably never going to happen. And that is where I will cut off the history for today. So why don't we start looking at these two masks and this pair of goggles in depth, starting with Cover's automatic respirator. So this thing really is just a rubber cup with an exhale valve and a sponge. The face piece is supposed to be completely round, but this one has taken the shape of the box, so that's why it appears square. And as you can see, it tapers down to the filter socket, I guess, and there's the inlet. There is no valve. I should mention that the earliest examples have some silk discs, well, a silk disc that is fitted inside of here in front of the sponge, but this one doesn't have it, and eventually they just stopped selling the silk discs with these kits. So all you're seeing here is the sponge. The exhale valve is very rudimentary in design, as it is just a free-floating mica valve in this little, I think it's tin or nickel housing. So here is a spare cover and valve disc. As you can see, it's completely hollow, and there are the little spikes in there to keep the valve, which is this, from reaching the top. Also, the holes that actually let the air out are only ever angled away from you so that you don't get any air blown back in your face, which would be kind of annoying. And I should also mention that the valve is actually where the name Covers Automatic Respirator comes from. These things were advertised as having an automatic exhale valve, which, I mean, as opposed to a manual exhale valve, which has never existed as far as I'm aware. The head harness is a very simple 2-point elastic strap, which can be removed and replaced as well as adjusted with these buckles. Moving on to the inside, you can see the exhale valve, the sponge, and the other ends of what holds the strap in place. I should note that Cover was not making these rivets. Instead, he was buying them. These examples are from United Dar. The way that these sponges actually acted as filters is that you would either wet them with water for pretty much dusts and just dusts, or you could impregnate them with neutralizing chemicals if you're facing something like chlorine or ammonia, etc. Also, these are natural sponges, so they're all going to be a little bit different. Last thing to show inside is this little marking here. Mine says 25. I have no idea what it means. Some of them don't have them, some of them do, and that's really all I can say about that. Speaking of markings, back on the outside and on the bottom, it should say Covers Patent. Because of how simple these things are, there's not really much else to say, so why don't we move on to the box? There's a couple different patterns of this box. This one happens to be the early one. Really, the only way they vary is in the font used and the means by which you open them. This one is just a lid that you can pull right off the top, but on the later pattern box, it's you have to kind of unfold it, if that makes sense. Oh yeah, and the other difference between the old and late pattern boxes is the late pattern boxes will have text on the top that's just a bunch of instructions, while the only text on the old pattern boxes is just on the front here. Inside the box, there's nothing, no cool details. However, they do come with a couple instruction cards. This one just tells you how to wear the headband, and this one is just general directions for using the mask. After filming this video, I actually got a second example of a Covers Automatic Respirator, this time a late example, which I can just briefly show you. This is what they looked like when they were selling them at around the 1960s. As you can see, there is a detachable head strap, just like on the Nod and Shakes I will show in a minute, well, in several minutes. And the box is of a different pattern. This one has the information on the silk disc blacked out on the lid. I don't know what's up with that. Other than that, the box opens differently, and this one is manufactured by Stone in South Bend, Indiana. And that's it for Covers Automatic Respirator, so next I will move on to the Nod and Shake goggles. Just kidding, I am not showing you the Nod and Shake goggles just yet. Instead, I'm showing you these Covers rubber goggles patented in 1907. These are a later example made after 1922. As you can see, they were made after the patent for the Nod and Shakes. These are also the only example that I know of to exist, so I am quite lucky to have them. As you can see, they are quite similar to the nod and shake goggles with only some minor differences. And that's because these are the basis for the nod and shake goggles. You see, Cover figured out that he could do this whole thing with the nodding and shaking, but he needed a goggle to put them on, so he took these and just added the extra rim. These goggles themselves, the actual lenses, are made out of some thin plastic, and the strap is the same that you see on the nod and shake gas mask, same buckle and everything. Then on the back, you can see just how poor a condition these are. They've definitely seen better days. Anyways, we are going to look at the nod and shake goggles for real this time. So here they are. I even put some water in the goggles so that you can see just how you're supposed to use them. They are quite simple. The mask of it is just made out of this brownish rubber, and there is no lens crimps on the frames, so you can easily just peel the rubber back to take the lenses out. On the side here, you can see the means of attaching the strap to the mask. The strap is actually identical to that of the Cover's automatic respirator. I should note that some of these use a screw like is on the nod and shake gas mask, which I will show you in a bit. Some, though, use this detachable swivel. Before I take the goggles off our assistant, I will show you how to actually nod and shake to clear fogging. So, it's essentially it's pretty much just that. It's a little easier when you're the one actually wearing the goggles, but they're on my assistant, so that'll have to do. Oh, and one last thing about these, before I show you the inside. The presence of all that water makes them fog up way quicker. So while the nod and shake thing does work, you're going to have to do it a lot. And here is the inside. You can see the lip that the water fits under. That's what keeps it from just draining while you're not nodding and shaking. When you are nodding and shaking, what keeps it in place is the glass, actually. I have no idea what the material is or what they did to it, but it is incredibly hydrophilic. Now I can move on to the box. This is a later pattern of box. There are 3 confirmed boxes and then 1 bag, which is the 1990s ProTech bag, which I showed you earlier in the video. This one is just a standard late pattern industrial as opposed to the earlier version of the industrial box, which has all the same art. The construction is just a little bit different, and the swimmer's goggle box, which is completely different. The lid of the box is the only place that has text, but it does come with this handy little instruction card. The final thing I've got to show you today is this Cover's nod and shake gas mask. Since we just talked about the goggles, I'm not going to talk about them too much on here, but I will point out that this uses the screws instead of the quick detach thingy. The design of the respirator portion is significantly different from that of Cover's automatic respirator, as they kind of slope it forward a bit. As you can see, it's not the same on here, and they also give it a little nose pocket instead of a nose cutout. The exterior tapering leading to the filter slot is also a whole lot more sleek than on Cover's automatic respirator. It is just an overall upgrade to the original. Moving to the side here, you can see the head harness, which is technically a 4-point head harness, but it's also very weirdly done because they just needed to strap goggles to the thing. In the back here, you can see where it can be adjusted, and also where the straps are attached via a screw that goes through both. The adjustment buckles are kind of the old school version where it's just a pair of spikes that stab their way through the strap itself. Here on the bottom is the only marking that I'm aware of. It just says Cover's Pat. Well, that's the only marking on the respirator portion. On the goggles, the markings are exactly the same as on the standalone nod and shakes. The inside of the respirator is pretty much exactly the same as a normal Cover's automatic respirator. Oh, I should also mention that these are also meant to be circular, but this one has taken the shape of its box as well. Speaking of the box, it's pretty much identical to the early pattern of Cover's automatic respirator box. In fact, these are literally made from them. If you look very closely at the portion of this label that is peeling off, you can see that there is the remnants of the word respirators underneath it. So they really did just take these boxes and apply these labels over them. And that's perfect for a company as small as H.S. Cover Co. You see, it was being run out of Cover's own house, and they were buying these boxes from a third party, so being able to cut costs a little bit just by attaching these labels over them, that was great. These masks also came in 3 packs that were these metal boxes that just had 3 of them in there, but unfortunately I don't have one of those to show you. I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but these didn't really sell well. You see, they had to compete with stuff that was just way, way better. In fact, they were selling these into the 1940s, so not only did they have to compete with the Burrell Cops, but also the All Vision, if you can imagine it. And, you know, a little sponge respirator like this, it didn't stand a chance. And that's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching this video. Part 2 of this series will be coming out a week from today, and I promise you that because I'm not going to release this video until all 3 parts are filmed and edited. In the next episode, I will be talking about H.S. Cover Co. from the 1930s to the early 1980s. So if that interests you, be sure to subscribe if you aren't already. And again, thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next one.